and Northern Ireland. The rain then by late morning pushing into parts of Cumbria, North and West Wales, eventually turning up into the tip of Cornwall. And those outbreaks of rain will be on and off. They'll be light to moderate, but some heavier stuff coming along for North Wales and North West England later. It's replaced by showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cool here with a breeze, 18 to 20 Celsius, but 27 Celsius in the southeast, where it's going to stay mostly sunny after any early residual cloud and showers get out of the way. Then this area of cloud and rain, well, it moves into central areas, the Midlands, southwest England, South Wales through the evening, and then it pushes during the early hours of tomorrow into East Anglia and the southeast. By this time it's turned to showers, some moderate to heavy bursts, but not as lively as recent thunderstorms. 19 Celsius in the southeast, though, a warm night to come, but much fresher conditions further northwest, where it'll be closer to the low to mid-teens, and actually plenty of showers first thing for central and western Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, Northern England, 1 or 2 turning up for North Wales. But once any early showers move out of the way from the southeast, here it's largely sunny skies, likewise across much of the rest of the south of the UK. But temperatures back to average, we're looking at low 20s generally, and in the north, high teens. Saturday starts off dry, especially in the south, some sunshine here. I think in the north it'll be a blustery day with showers spreading south. And Sunday brings with it more general rain, especially in western areas.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A-level results day, but is that the only thing making the political weather this week? Perhaps not. We'll be exploring all A-level results, also the crime situation in the capital, that and the terms of trade with developing countries, and of course, the Tory leadership race. All to come on The Briefing this morning, following the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A-level results across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are out. The overall pass rate is down on last year. It's gone from 99.5% to 98.4%. It is, though, higher than pre-pandemic levels, up from 97.6% in 2019. Meanwhile, the number of students accepted onto degree courses has fallen by 2% this year, according to UCAS, but it is still the second highest rate on record. Executive head teacher at My Online Schooling, Rob Leach, told GB News one-off exams aren't the best way to test young people.
The current cohort of students have had a really tough time this year. And yet, as a system, we've gone back to the pre-pandemic status quo when it comes to these high-stake, cliff-edge, one-off set-piece examinations, which can give students grades that stay with them for life and perhaps are not the most accurate way of measuring how ready they are to embrace the opportunities.
Rail, tube and bus passengers face further travel disruption amid 3 days of industrial action. Train services will be affected today and Saturday, with tubes and buses disrupted tomorrow. 80% of services will be affected today as more than 40,000 workers walk out in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Detectives investigating the murder of an elderly man in West London have arrested a 44-year-old. 87-year-old Thomas Halloran was stabbed to death while riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Police say the arrest was made as a result of the CCTV images released yesterday. Chief Inspector Jim Eastwood thanked the public for what he described as overwhelming support following a horrific incident. The government has been accused of being asleep at the wheel over the energy crisis. That as an Ofgem director quits over the energy price cap. Christine Farnish told The Times she'd resigned because she couldn't support a decision to recover supplier costs by raising customer prices. She claimed consumers now face having several £100 added to their bills. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Tom with the briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:37 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, I'm joined live in the studio today by the Labour titan and former MP for Ealing North, Stephen Pound, who's going to be with me throughout the show this morning to discuss all of the big stories. But before we move on to A-level results this morning, there's, of course, some sombre news from your former constituency of Ealing, Stephen, with the killing of an 87-year-old man in broad daylight. So now, obviously, we can't get into the specifics of this case as it's an ongoing active police case, but I just find it extraordinary how potentially low down the news agenda such a tragic and seismic event has become.
I think that's, to a certain extent, it's a reflection of the times that we live in and the fact that there have been 4 or 5 stabbings. There was one in Acton last week, and it happens a lot. But, I mean, fair play to GB News for leading on this one, and I'm very, very grateful that you are the leaders on this one. Look, there's things we can say, there's things we can't say. What we can say is that at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon in very, very warm weather, the bright lights by one of the busiest roads in London, the Western Avenue, an 87-year-old man, an absolute community hub, the guy for whom Greenford seemed to revolve around him. Everybody knew him. He'd be sitting outside Tesco's there in the Hoover building, playing his accordion. Everybody knew it. The most frail, fragile of men, on the one hand, 87 years old, could hardly walk, on his mobility scooter, with the big Ukrainian flag on the front, collecting money for Ukraine. And he gets killed. He's stabbed to death in broad daylight at 4 o'clock in an Ealing afternoon. And that, sometimes I think we have to take a step back and say, what have we come to? Why weren't there more police officers on the street? Why could a group of people or even an individual do this to such a sweet, innocent man? And what did anybody do? What can we do? All we can do is throw our hands up in horror. But there will be a huge memorial mass for him at Our Lady of the Visitation. And believe you me, Tom, there will be people queuing in the streets outside because, interesting, his name was Tom, but we called him Terry. For some reason, he was always known as Terry. So well known. He'd sit there holding court in the cafe opposite Tesco's in Greenford. And it was like, his mobility scooter was like a throne because he'd be sitting there and people would be coming up and he'd give bits. When I was an MP, he used to give me lots of advice and not always advice that I wanted, but he was always there. And such a high-profile, sweet, gentle man who the last thing he did on earth before he was killed was to raise money for Ukrainian refugees in Ealing. That was his last act.
Really, really sombre stuff there. Well, let's hope that this doesn't drop down the news agenda, that this is something that we continue to talk about as a society, because it really is very significant. But turning to A-levels now, students across the country will receive their results today. It's the first year that results will be based on in-person exams as opposed to teachers' assessments since the pandemic. And those results that are therefore expected to be slightly lower than the inflated grades of the past 2 years. Well, let's turn to our East of England reporter, Ed Crawford, who's outside the County Upper School in Bury St Edmunds. Ed, thank you for joining us this morning. What's the mood on the ground there? Are the students nervous?
Good morning, Tom. The mood on the ground is there is a lot of nerves, but there's also a lot of smiling faces. As you said, I'm in County Upper School in Bury St Edmunds, Suffolk. Now, this school holds a special place in my heart as well, because I stood here 16 years ago, just where these students are, and frankly, I managed to scrape through and get into uni. Anyway, I am joined by two ladies who have just got their results, Emily and Frankie. How are you doing this morning?
Really good, thank you.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Now, can you tell me, Emily, what did you get?
I got 3 A's, better than expected. I'm really happy with that, and I met my offer and everything, so it's great.
Frankie?
I got 2 A stars and a B, so again, really happy with that.
Oh, terrific. Now, I have to ask, Emily, where are you going to go to university? What are you going to study? And what are your hopes career-wise going forwards?
I'm going to UAL, so I'm going to film school in London, which I'm really, really excited about. Career-wise, directing is my passion. That's what I've always wanted to do. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see, how everything. It's a complex industry, but I'm really excited about it.
We've done incredibly well. Now, Frankie, I have to ask you the same questions. What did you get? Where are you going to study, and what are you going to study?
I got an offer at medicine at King's College London. So hopefully, my ambitions is to become a doctor. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, everything's good.
Any idea what kind of area you want to specialise in?
I think there's so many. I think I just have to trial them all and see which one.
We've both done spectacularly well, and there was a lot of talk about grade inflation, and a lot of people were nervous and worried. Is there a sense of relief to get it done today?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, throughout exams and even before in the build-up, there was a lot of confusion about advanced information, about COVID, about the impact online school had had. So we weren't really sure where we'd be today. But I think it's been okay. I think it's sorted itself out.
Yeah, I have to agree with her.
I have to ask you, ladies, has COVID been a bit of a disruption to your education? Would you say?
Definitely. I mean, the first lockdown happened when we were at the end of year 11. So with that, we didn't actually get to sit a proper exam. So these were the first ones. So I think for everyone that kind of impacted their grade a bit. And also we had another lockdown halfway through year 12. So I think that definitely delayed our progress, having to do everything online and all the troubles that come with that as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, emotionally, mentally, practically, COVID obviously is a huge complication and already stressful experience. There's nothing nice about exams. So I think the fact that we've got through it and that we're all together today, our GCSE results day was very different to this. We were all in masks, all 2 meters apart. So to come here like this and be able to kind of meet and hug our friends and everything has been great.
Well, we've both done exceptionally well. You should be very proud of yourselves. Now, there have been a lot of faces, but ultimately there's been a lot of smiles around, and it seems like it's been a good day for most.
Well, Ed Crawford, thank you very much for bringing us that news there from the County Upper School in Bury St Edmunds. Really appreciate that. And with Frankie and Emily, well done to them too. Let's turn to Stephen Pound quickly now, because a lot of the discussion around this has been that the grades this year are lower than the last 2 years. Surely that's a good thing. That means they're sort of worth more. The real trouble of the last couple of years was this grade inflation that saw a lack of differentiation between students.
Well, it's very, very difficult to actually quantify what grade inflation is. I mean, what you can say is that there's been a rising graph now for the best part of 23 years of an increase. Now, there's a whole range of reasons for that, but I think you're absolutely right to pay credit to Frankie and Emily, but I'd like to say one thing. We celebrate the people today who've got their A-levels. Let's also celebrate those people who choose the vocational route. Let's also celebrate those, we need doctors, by all means, but we also need plumbers, electricians, craftsmen. We need other people. So I think that where we are going now is that the old Tony Blair ideal of half the country going to university, I really think that we've plateaued on that now. And hate to think that because someone does so well in Bury St Edmunds, that there's a concomitant not doing well for someone who's doing vocational work. Because I think vocational degrees are just as worthwhile and just pretty essential for the country. But, you know,
should the government be doing more to emphasise that route as something that is just as prestigious?
I think so, because, I mean, prestigious is I think you're right to use that word, because at the moment, if you're a barrister, if you're a doctor, it seems to be a prestigious occupation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you're an electrician, that's a prestigious occupation. And you know, it keeps the lights on, literally. So I think the government could be doing more to actually emphasise the benefit. And to be fair, Nadim Zahawi, when he was Education Secretary, did precisely that. You know, he talked about actually bigging up the vocational qualifications and city and guilds and things like that. So congratulations to Frankie and Emily, but also, you know, I'd like to give congratulations to sort of Frank and Eddie and the people who are doing their vocational work.
Really, really important point there. And I suppose that's as much to do with the private sector making sure that they don't always see a university degree as that barrier to entry. I found it bizarre that policemen need degrees now. I mean, that seems to be something that doesn't feed through into...
Well, I think it's ludicrous. I mean, my wife's a nurse and I worked in the health service, and up until the year 2000, you didn't have to have a degree to be a nurse. Then in the year 2000, I think called Project 2000, where you had to have a degree to be a nurse. Now, to be a nurse, you did your 4 or 5 years training. Now, nowadays, it just seems like so many different jobs. And of course, it's not just having to get a degree, then you have sort of problems of positive discrimination, all these other issues. I think that, I mean, and I speak, I have to say, from a certain perspective of prejudice here, because, I mean, I left school at 15 by mutual agreement with my head teacher. But oddly enough, years and years later, when I was older than you, I actually did go to the London School of Economics after 3 years of evening classes and damned hard work. But you know, when I went for jobs, people didn't actually say, you know, what's your degree? They actually said, you know, what's your experience? And I think that there's no doubt now that the problem is that there's kind of an algorithm if you apply for a job. If you apply for a job and you've got a 2-1 or a 2-2, you're not going to get an interview in a lot of places, particularly obviously city traders and people like that. So, you know, you've got to tick those boxes. I mean, if there's one thing that GB News stands for, it's getting away from the tick box mentality and actually talking about the individual and people's personal qualities. And let's go for that. By the way, how old were you when you left school?
I was at school until... Have I left? I was at school until the age of 18. I was at university until the age of 21, and then I moved to London, as so many people do. Perhaps we should have a greater emphasis on all of the other parts of the country that people can do well in as well. But we're going to pause this conversation now because we do need to move to our next topic of the day, which is about terms of trade. Yes, the Department for International Trade has announced a new developing countries trading scheme, slashing trade barriers to some of the poorest countries in the world. Having left the European Union and, crucially, the EU Customs Union too, the UK is now able to set its own terms of trade with the world. That doesn't just mean bilateral trade deals, as we've seen with Japan, Australia and New Zealand, but it too allows the UK to institute blanket new trade terms to less developed countries. Now, the EU ran a fairly generous scheme in this area known as Anything But Arms, but this week the UK has announced it's going further, building on that programme, bringing new countries into this new, more generous scheme, meaning not only cheaper goods to be imported to the UK from those countries, but also this policy is deeply humanitarian, worth tens of millions of pounds to developing countries now and perhaps hundreds of millions by the end of the decade. Well, is this a fairly unique thing in politics, a win-win policy, something which means we can provide to the poorest and actually get cheaper stuff too? Well, I'm joined now by Ian Mitchell, Senior Policy Fellow and Co-Director Europe for the Centre for Global Development. Thank you for joining us this morning. And first of all, what are the changes here between the scheme that we operated under the European Union versus this new scheme that has just been announced this week?
Good morning, Tom. Yeah, so it is, and as you said, an improvement on the EU scheme, and I think there are probably 3 parts to that improvement. The first one is that a greater number of goods will qualify for zero tariffs. So under the EU scheme, it was 80%. The new UK scheme, it's 85%. I think a second dimension is that there are a broader group of countries that qualify. So 8 new countries will qualify for lower tariffs. And then there are a group of simplifications, and that's the third thing. So the government has removed some very low tariffs that are called nuisance tariffs. It's removed some seasonal tariffs, and it's made the process for achieving those lower tariffs for the countries easier and simpler.
Now, there were some preclusions within the European scheme, meaning that if some of these developing countries didn't meet all of their global obligations, didn't sign up to some international treaties or weren't following through with those, then the favourable terms of trade would be dropped. In this new UK scheme, that sort of automatic process has changed. How so?
Yeah, that's right. So the government's moved from a system to where you expect countries to have signed up to international conventions before they qualify for the reduced tariffs, to one where qualifying for the tariffs only depends on economic vulnerability. And as in the previous scheme, ministers and the government retain discretion over whether countries can get those reductions. So if they are egregiously or systematically in breach of international conventions, then the government can withdraw the tariffs. They've also broadened the areas where they can withdraw those preferences. So they had already been on labour rights, for example, but they've been extended to anti-corruption and also to climate issues and some other international issues where ministers want to maintain discretion. So it'll be interesting to see, for example, in principle, Syria qualifies for the new lower tariffs, but I think the government and most people have very serious concerns about the Syrian regime, and it will be interesting to see how ministers deal with Syria in principle qualifying for the new regime.
There's a greater deal of discretion for UK ministers in terms of who this applies to, I suppose. Just finally in this conversation, what does this mean for British consumers? Are we going to see cheaper goods coming in as well as helping these developing countries?
Yes, we will. And I think it's, you alluded to this at your introductory remarks. I think trade tariffs and frictions are unhelpful to both sides. And so if you can reduce them without damaging your own industry disproportionately or by giving away negotiating capital for trade deals, then removing them makes sense to both sides. And so in this case, these changes are relatively incremental for UK consumers, but they're moving in the right direction. So imports will be cheaper and it will make a small contribution to bringing down inflation.
Really interesting stuff there. Some positive news on our international trade front. Well, Ian Mitchell of the Centre for Global Development, thanks very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Now, finally today, GB News will exclusively be broadcasting the leadership hustings between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss in Manchester tomorrow from 7 to 9 p.m. The legend that is Alistair Stewart will interview Miss Truss and Mr Sunak separately, and questions will be selected at random and then put to the pair by Tory party members. So, Alistair, how are you gonna handle this one? Both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. What's the game plan?
Well, the game plan is to avoid what Stephen Pound was talking to you about, and that is box ticking. I think we've got to the point in the campaign where we have heard an awful lot trowelled over many, many times. And in my bit, and you're quite right to point out that I get 12 minutes and the audience get 15 minutes, in my bit, I want to take a deep breath and say, what does it mean to be a Tory? If you're going to win this leadership and become the next Prime Minister, in the aftermath of Boris Johnson's defenestration, what does it mean to be a Tory? What do you think about the size of the state? What do you think about the scope of what government should try and do? You were with me up in Lee, and we heard Liz Truss talk about Number 10 having become too big and too presidential. What about government? Government itself. Do we need all of those departments because it's all paid for by taxpayers? I also want to drill into two specific areas, which I don't think we've heard enough about, and that is immigration and whether or not either of these candidates would embrace the David Davis policy of pushback, because the ports are being difficult, the Rwanda plan is difficult. So how do you actually stop the boats? And the final thing that I want to try and get more on that we've not had a lot about lately is the NHS. We know that you can cut the 2-year waiting list, but what about all of the others? The answer isn't just chucking money at it. The answer is reform. What would they both do about making the NHS fit for purpose? So I think it could be quite interesting, and it'll certainly be lively.
Certainly will be lively. We seem to have had this temperature rising throughout the contest, sometimes getting a little bit scrappy with some of these personal attacks between the candidates. Not one to miss. 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. tomorrow. We'll look forward to see it with you, Alistair Stewart. Thanks for the preview there. Thanks, Alistair. Now, finally today on the programme, 30 seconds with you, Stephen Pound. The state of the race. Where on earth are we in this leadership race, and what are you expecting from Manchester tomorrow?
Well, I'm just going to say, I knew Alistair back in the National Union Students' days, and I have to say he's worn rather better than I have. What I'm expecting is probably blood in the carpet now, because we're at the stage now of desperation. Liz Truss is so far ahead. Yesterday they spoke to 640 Conservatives in Northern Ireland, and they, it was just absolute desperation, both of them scrabbling for it. So what I'm actually looking for is something that, in addition to what Alistair said, we haven't heard enough about small business. We haven't heard enough about business support, because frankly, that's the lifeblood of this country. We're talking about domestic support, absolutely right. We're talking about the NHS, but we've got to talk about business.
And some business now going under due to those energy bills as well this week. Well, Stephen Pound, thank you very much for your analysis there. Blood on the carpet. Will we see that tomorrow? We'll have to tune in to GB News. That's it for the programme today. Coming up, it's To The Point, but for now, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Following the intense thunderstorms that some southern counties saw yesterday, today it's fine in the south, but it is already turning cloudier further north and west, with some outbreaks of rain moving in, this time coming from the Atlantic. The rain not quite as impactful as the intense thunderstorms that have been very hit and miss over the last few days, but nevertheless it's a damp start to the day for western and central Scotland and Northern Ireland. The rain then by late morning pushing into parts of Cumbria, North and West Wales, eventually turning up into the tip of Cornwall. And those outbreaks of rain will be on and off. They'll be light to moderate, but some heavier stuff coming along for North Wales and North West England later. It's replaced by showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cool here with a breeze, 18 to 20 Celsius, but 27 Celsius in the southeast, where it's going to stay mostly sunny after any early residual cloud and showers get out of the way. Then this area of cloud and rain, well, it moves into central areas, the Midlands, southwest England, South Wales through the evening, and then it pushes during the early hours of tomorrow into East Anglia and the southeast. By this time it's turned to showers, some moderate to heavy bursts, but not as lively as recent thunderstorms. 19 Celsius in the southeast, though, a warm night to come, but much fresher conditions further northwest, where it'll be closer to the low to mid-teens, and actually plenty of showers first thing for central and western Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, Northern England, 1 or 2 turning up for North Wales. But once any early showers move out of the way from the southeast, here it's largely sunny skies, likewise across much of the rest of the south of the UK. But temperatures back to average, we're looking at low 20s generally, and in the north, high teens. Saturday starts off dry, especially in the south, some sunshine here. I think in the north it'll be a blustery day with showers spreading south. And Sunday brings with it more general rain, especially in western areas.